Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis with Forbes Breaking News. Joining me now is Charles Lipson, Professor Emeritus at the University of Chicago. Charles, we have a lot to break down today. Just earlier this morning, Hunter Biden did make a surprise appearance on Capitol Hill. He delivered remarks, which I want to get your take on. But before we do, let's go back to last week. Hunter Biden was charged with 9 tax crimes. 3 of them are felonies and 6 are misdemeanors. How serious do you think this is?
It's pretty serious, although I was struck by the fact that there were a lot of things missing. The first thing that was missing was he was not charged under FARA, which is the Foreign Agents Registration Act. That would be particularly harsh for a president to have a son who's a foreign agent or charged with it. I don't know what's keeping him from doing it. They've charged a lot of people under that, including Paul Manafort, for doing a lot less. And so I don't know. The second thing is these tax charges should have been brought a long time ago. The third thing is that we don't have an explanation, and we'll never get one, from the U.S. attorney in California who refused to bring these charges. And remember, we were told by Merrick Garland that even before David Weiss, the U.S. prosecutor originally from Delaware, who was then upped to special counsel, that even before he was upped to that position, he had the right to bring those cases on his own in California, but apparently he didn't. So that was a misstatement, a deceit, a lie, whatever you want to call it, about what was going on. The final thing I would say politically is that Joe Biden, let me get 2 words, Joe Biden, he was nowhere mentioned anywhere in this, and Democrats will say that is an indication that he was not involved. Maybe. But we've seen this Office of Special Counsel take a lot of time and effort to avoid doing anything that would touch on Joe Biden. But even if he's not, the whole premise of the Democratic Party's policies for almost a century has been rich people don't pay enough taxes. And people who make a lot of income don't pay enough taxes, and we have they should. That's the only fair thing. It's legal, and sometimes they go beyond that to say you shouldn't use legal loopholes, which of course they themselves put into the law. But how can Joe Biden, and who's now on tape over years saying the rich don't pay their fair share, the rich don't pay their fair share, it's a lot harder for him to go out and make those arguments when his son is making millions and millions of dollars, has the money, is not going to the IRS. Sometimes people have to go to the IRS and say, I did make this income, but let's work out a payment scheme because I can't pay it now.
Federal prosecutors did allege he spent money on a, quote, extravagant lifestyle instead of paying the IRS. So to your point about President Biden and what this means for him, point blank, do you think hearing news about another indictment for Hunter Biden, is this changing hearts and minds in voters?
One of the problems we have in answering that question, I'm not using the royal we, I mean anybody would have a problem answering it, is that polling is no longer as reliable as it used to be. I mean, we know that. In a country that is as divided as it is, people don't always tell the pollsters what they think. We're a year out from this. But Joe Biden is in real trouble in terms of his popularity, and this does not help. Now, in my opinion, there are 3 questions that bear on Joe relative to Hunter. And I want to be very clear. Hunter is not a public official, and lots of people in their family have black sheep and all the rest. So it's not inherently a problem for Joe Biden unless three things happen. One is, did he know anything about this? He has repeatedly said he knew nothing, and that's very hard to believe, and we'll come back to that if you wish. The second thing is, did he do anything to aid this family grifting operation? And aiding would include things like demonstrating to the people who are paying money that the son actually does have access to the father in the context of working with these people who are paying him money. So you can't just say, I'm the son here, I visit the White House a lot of times, but calling in to business meetings, getting these other people into the White House, those kinds of things. So did he know? Did he do anything to aid? And then the final one is, did he benefit financially? That's complicated because obviously they've taken a lot of trouble in setting up these LLCs and so forth to avoid touching, to avoid disclosing where the money came from and where it went. And there was no legitimate purpose for setting these up. It was a game of shell companies, but it was kind of like a shell game, right? Where they were moving the P under all the different shells. Can you find it? But when you're 80 years old and you're, one of the things that you often do is you want your income or wealth to begin to go to other members of the family, right? If you have more than you need to spend at that point in your life, you're thinking, what about my grandchildren? What about my children? What about my charities? You know, those kinds of things. I don't need, if I have $10 million, I don't need an 11th. I would rather have that money go to people who can use it. So it may be that you knew and you aided and you benefited in the sense that the money went to the people you wanted it to go to. And I should say, although I'm not a lawyer, I have read enough about previous court decisions that it is a corrupt act by a public official. If that public official does something to create an income stream for another member of the family or another beneficiary that they want the money directed to, that's a crime. And it's a crime for the public official. So it's not as if you can completely escape all of that. So I'd say Joe has a lot of questions to answer, and Hunter has a lot of questions to answer, and he's not going to answer them under oath.
I think that's a good place to bring us to today. This morning, just a few hours ago, Hunter Biden defied the subpoena from House Republicans for a closed-door deposition. Instead, he had this surprise press conference on Capitol Hill, and he once again said he will only testify before the House Oversight Committee if it's public. What do you make of him going to a podium, talking to the press, talking to the public in that way?
It's so interesting, isn't it, Brittany, that he did that? It's part and parcel of his hiring Abby Lowell, this brilliant hardball litigator, as his attorney. His previous attorney, the one who negotiated the deal that blew up in the federal court when the judge in Delaware asked one simple question: what does this cover? And they couldn't explain it. Or rather, there was a disagreement between what Hunter's people thought it covered and what the U.S. attorney thought it covered. And so that means there's no agreement if they can't agree on what it covers. So at that point, the attorney who had been hired primarily for his skill in negotiating these agreements was replaced by Abby Lowell. And Abby Lowell is one of those in-your-face, like the old joke about the dog who bits the lawyer's dog. You weren't bid. It wasn't my dog. That sort of thing. He's going to go full tilt, and his client obviously wants that. Um, it's worth remembering that Hunter Biden went to Yale Law School, and we know he got in because President Bill Clinton actually called the law school to urge them to admit him. Um, that's privilege, my friend. But in any event, normally the President of the United States doesn't intervene in my own job applications. But I would say that there's a big, big difference between holding a press conference on the steps of the Capitol and testifying under oath when people can actually question you and you're subject to perjury claims. I would say another thing. Um, let's think about what normally happens. If you, Brittany, were given a subpoena to come before Congress and you didn't do it, what would happen? Well, the answer is Congress, although it has some, a few marshals who could arrest you, that's not what happens. Congress turns it over to the Department of Justice. They, after Congress has said you're in contempt of Congress, okay? And then the Department of Justice decides whether they're going to go after you. So when Eric Holder as Attorney General, refused to turn over documents or do certain testimony or whatever it was, they turned it over to him at the Department of Justice, and surprise, he didn't do anything. Okay? And that's what will happen here. Now, everything changes if the House votes for an impeachment committee, because the impeachment committee has more authority to go directly to a federal court and get the federal court to say, Mr. Hunter Biden, you must come and testify, or you will be going to jail for refusal. And so it strengthens the case, not for impeachment, but for an impeachment committee. Because the impeachment committees get more deference from the federal courts. They can go to the federal courts directly. And one of the claims that you must meet when you're asking the courts to enforce something is, do you have a legislative purpose? And if you're investigating the President of the United States for impeachment, and you're trying to get evidence from his son about the transfer of funds, that's a clear legislative purpose. So I would say that what would likely happen is nothing will ultimately come out of his refusal to testify the Oversight Committee. But the same subpoenas will be issued by the new impeachment committee if it is voted on by the House of Representatives, and when he refuses that, they will go to federal court. And and Hunter's people know that, so that means they're trying to run out the clock.
What's interesting is you and I have been talking about Hunter Biden for months. House Republicans have been talking about Hunter Biden really since the 2020 election at least, but he's been largely a private person. He hasn't really been giving press conferences that I've seen. This is the longest remarks that I've ever seen Hunter Biden give, and he called out Jim Jordan by name, James Comer by name. He also said this, quote, "Republicans do not want an open process." Do you think there's truth behind that statement?
There's a half-truth behind it. If you look at the way that all witnesses have been handled, not only by this committee, but by Adam Schiff and previous committees, they always have these closed-door testimonies before they do any public hearing. And they do it for several reasons. The first is that the closed-door hearings will be handled. Hunter would be asked a series of questions over a long period of time by a professional investigative attorney for the committee. Now, the Democrats will have their own attorney, and he or she will get a chance then to ask questions and do follow-ups. And Hunter will have his own attorney. And my hunch is that what would happen is that he will take the fifth and won't, because he's under indictment elsewhere, and he won't want to. And sometimes people might say, well, why don't you answer the questions you can answer and then not the ones you can't? But there have been rulings that say if you start to answer some questions, you can't take the fifth on others. This is all beyond my pay grade. The second thing is that you should disclose to the public has an interest in Hunter's answers to these questions, or whether he takes the fifth or whatever. And so that should be disclosed. The question is when. And why don't you disclose it right away? And the answer is because if you and I, Brittany, are part of doing something together, and it might be potentially illegal, and they have you testify and then they have me testify, and you go first, they don't want me to see what you said, right? Because I can coordinate my testimony in that way. And so that is definitely the case. They don't want Hunter to know what the people who have been his business partners in all these deals, or the bankers who handle the money, any of that. They don't want him to know any of that. And then the third thing is, and you saw this with Adam Schiff's committee, and then Jerry Nadler, you want to put before the public, you want to organize who goes, you want to set up the situation, you want to have only your best witnesses, and the Democrats are in the minority, and in the House that means they don't necessarily get to call their witnesses. So there's a number of reasons, but the main point is this is standard procedure. He's asking for an exception, and they will give him a public hearing, but they're only going to give it to him after they've gotten the closed door testimony from everybody else. And at that point, they may decide, even if he's in contempt and refusing to answer behind closed doors, they may say, okay, let's just go on the record and do it this way. But if they do it the normal way, Brittany, with 5 minutes by, a showboating representative from the Republicans, and then 5 minutes from a showboating representative from the Democrats, it's a shambles. You never get anything that way. And the question, but of course the Congress people love it because they're trying to get reelected.
Something he said that was interesting. He did acknowledge he made mistakes in his life. He did say, I wasted opportunities and privileges I was afforded. But during these remarks, he said this, that he was, quote, here today to correct how the MAGA right has portrayed me for their political purposes. Do you think by this response, defying the subpoena, saying, hey, I'm only going to testify if it's public, do you think that's changing the narrative of Hunter Biden?
Well, it's trying to. That's the whole point. But I think the problem is it won't wash. They will immediately come out and say, look, he can say what he wants in public. He could have said this in California. He can say it in Delaware. He can say it wherever he wants. But it's not under oath. He's not subject to perjury. He can say, I can fly at will, but I choose not to right now. The other problem he has with I've made mistakes in my life is that he's making two claims simultaneously that are inconsistent with each other. One is, and his father is making the claims, right, that he was really impaired by his addiction. You have to excuse him because of all of these problems. That's on the one hand. And on the other hand, during the same period, he's earning millions of dollars as a, quote, consultant and board member. Well, you can either be one or the other. You can either be so incompetent and so irresponsible that you can't really be held accountable by the public, maybe legally accountable, but not accountable by the public for what you're doing, or you're so competent you're worth being paid tens of millions of dollars by all of these organizations. And if it is the former, that you don't have any skills, you're suffering from addictions and a number of other problems, and you're receiving millions of dollars, well, what are you doing for this? What are you getting? I know you and I make millions of dollars, but you can see what you're doing, Brittany. You deserve your millions.
I wish. I don't think anyone. That's all I can say is I wish, but that's not the case for me. Charles, we do have to end it there, but per usual, thank you so much for your insights. It's always a pleasure talking with you.